You're recording now.
All right, great. Thank you, Christine, and welcome everybody. Today we have a little bit of an unusual day. We have our a special session of our doctoral seminar here at WPI, which is normally on Friday mornings, Boston time at 10 o'clock. But we have a special one this week due to our guest today, Bob Cavana, who comes to us all the way from New Zealand. And he just was telling us it's on the order of a 33-hour plane trip. So God bless you, Bob, for enduring that to come and visit with us here at WPI. It's also a simultaneous meeting of the economics chapter of the System Dynamics Society, although we will soon be a special interest group rather than chapter due to a bunch of legal things and what have you that are happening in the state of New York. So, but we're still technically a chapter. And so we have kind of a simultaneous thing going on here. And just very briefly about Bob, longtime system dynamicist, systems thinker, has a background in both economics and management, and has done many, many system dynamics projects over the years, personally with faculty colleagues as well as doctoral students and what have you. And he's going to tell us a bunch of stories about his experiences in group model building, what have you, in the public sector in New Zealand. So with that, Bob, thank you so very much for joining us, and I'll turn things over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks, everyone. Nice to be here. And hello to some of my friends and colleagues in the economics chapter out there, if there's any there. But yeah, today, so in terms of, I'll probably point to the screen a little bit in terms of the conversation as I sit back, or if you don't mind that. So today I'm going to talk about some of my experiences with some studies I did at the New Zealand government mostly, and I really want to bring out some points about group model building and some of the learnings that I've had. So I thought the best way to do this is to perhaps run through a series of studies and just draw attention to any sort of things. In particular. So there's a quality management study with the Ministry of Health, Human Resources one with the New Zealand Army, National Planning Scheme with the Forestry Research Institute, and tobacco modelling, policy modelling with the Ministry of Health. Okay, so these are the papers, so you can download these pretty easily. As you see, one's in the System Dynamics Review, one's in Systems Research and Paper Science. One's in the proceedings of the conference at Sullivan. I'm at Sullivan it's Korea. And the other one's in the American Journal of Public Health. Oh, you adhere in America will know that journal well. So that's the literature. But you know, I won't be having a test on this, so don't worry if you don't follow it up. Okay, well, let's get this sort of a sense of where we're going with this. I mean, we recognise that there's different approaches to systems thinking, and there's the typically hard approaches versus soft approaches. I think it's a useful distinction to have in mind at all times, because people see the world differently. You know, those with a more positivist background, a more mathematical background, like people like myself, engineering, science, civil sciences, sort of tend to be typically attracted more to the hard approaches, which of course is the simulation side of system dynamics. And then there's the soft approaches, which the purpose is to give debate and insight into the world, where typically the people with the strongest capability there are those that have a fundamental interpretivist paradigm, philosophical outlook, and they generally deal with people, anthropologists, sociologists, people like them, for example. And the systematicity actually lies in the process of inquiry rather than the object itself that was produced. So in actual fact, one's qualitative, the soft side, quantitative, the hard side. In terms of validation, repeatable, with the hard side, common sense with the real world. Soft side is coherent, logically consistent, plausible. The goal is insight and learning, of course, the soft approach, and outcome is progress through group learning. So in actual fact, we find that the qualitative system dynamics sort of typically fits into a soft approach, and the quantitative system dynamics fits into the hard approach. We can apply group model building to both, and in combination. And in fact, any study we possibly have a combination of all. But we recognise that I think the most fundamental thing is to recognise the backgrounds of individuals entering these studies. We all bring something different to the table. And that's why group model building is so important, because I can be a mathematician, but I can still participate in this group model building process, and actually I can facilitate it as long as I've got people representing behavioural sciences or whatever the object of the study is, who are the experts in the field. So I don't have to be an expert in the field, I can be part of a team. In fact, the greatest work on group model building really has been done by Jack Billings' company in the Netherlands, and George Richardson and David Anderson company at State University of New York and Albany. And so they got, if you want to explore the literature, you can't have to go back and look at their materials. You'll see it in our papers. In fact, one paper which I was going to discuss, but the very few short papers I can discuss later, but we've got time, is one that we looked at about group model building with my PhD student, Rodney Scott, who's actually made quite a name for himself in this field globally. But he became runner in the Janelle Meadows Award a few years back, which is quite achievable, as you will know, for a student. Anyway, so here we are. So we recognise there's two sides of the equation with systems and modelling work. There's the softer side, typically, and there's the harder side. There is the critical side and other aspects, but these are the two basic paradigms. I think it's important to sort of we recognise that. So there are limitations.
Can I ask a quick question about the people organizations when you say the hard approach is not long to take into account? I mean, people obviously are important. If you represent say a productivity sector and model their human capital, so you can count them and you can assign some quantitative data associated with those people that are participating in the system. With what you say they're not. So what about people typically are not included when you talk about the hard approaches?
Well, people like us, I'm typically down the quantitative side myself. My background's in mathematical economics, for example, and management science, operations research. So I would typically take a harder perspective, even though I use logic and causal modelling, especially logic. I mean, that's logic rather than fully interpretivist. And what has to be, it depends on what you're working on. But you can count the numbers, of course, but the human behaviour.
Okay, so
it's
the soft aspects.
Yes, the soft aspects. How you model that. And
perception and viewpoint.
Yeah, that's it, how you model it, because even though you can use surveys and instruments to actually collect data, you have to be very careful how you model it and what assumptions you make. I mean, hard system scientists typically try and abstract from those relationships, but there could be all sorts of limitations in how you abstract it. And you have to be very careful that you don't make too many assumptions about how applicable they are there in the world. You might be taking very small sample behaviour, including your relationship.
Yeah, for me, some of the just to give you context, I've worked most of my life in R&D environments. So people are a very important aspect in terms of the production of the innovation technologies that we're delivering to the market. So you quantify them when you're planning your resource planning, because they have the ability to produce things. You need certain types of skill sets, and obviously we're not probably factoring in things about. I mean, nowadays they talk about happiness and things like that. Those are the soft things that are emerging into cultural aspects. But ultimately, we do like headcount and planning and deliverables and annual operating plans, and it's all based on counting people and multiplying by their cost numbers and stuff like that. So.
That's right. The metrics that you use, if you define them as the standard, say, physical metrics, then obviously you'll produce them. If you're looking at some soft metrics at the same time, then you do other methods.
Okay.
You can, of course, use system dynamics to help for that process as well. And so I'll just go down that. Let's not go to the next slide. Oops. Right, so integrative system dynamics methodology. Well, to some extent, it's just repackaging the system dynamics methodology, which we first produced in 2000 with the first book that Campus Money and myself wrote on systems, thinking systems modelling. And this 2007 edition was Systems Thinking System Dynamics, Managing Change and Complexity. But you can get that paper, which you can download anyway, and get the methodology and get the description. But we tended to think, or at least I tended to think at that stage, or a bit later, that the systems thinking related to the problem structuring and the causal modeling phases, and then the systems design related to the modeling, dynamic modeling, modeling. Systems practice was the planning and the organisation learning implementation. But in actual fact, that distinction there can be disputed about whether that's appropriate, whether the whole thing is systems thinking or whether the whole thing is systems practice for that matter. But I think it's just a sort of definition just to break it up at the time. So,
excuse me, Professor Cavana.
yes?
On the chat, someone asked if you could speak more loudly or clearly, closer to the microphone, which is near the TV. If I remember.
Move over one seat.
Move along, one seat? Yeah. So where's the microphone? Oh, up there.
I think it's up with the camera.
Camera right there.
Oh, okay. All right, well, I'll probably, I was sort of looking around before, so possibly when I look around, we might lose track of my voice. But could you guys, if I sort of focus on...
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
All right, I'll focus on the screen. And can you hear me now?
Yes, it's better now. Thank you.
Okay, that's good. Just let me know if my voice does sort of quiet down. Okay, the first study I look at is drivers of quality in health services. And this was an interest, this was published some time ago, as you can see, 1999 in System Clinics Review. But the reason why I still discuss this case is that it was an exploratory study at the Ministry of Health in New Zealand, example of qualitative system dynamics. We're looking at trying to identify factors that interact to drive quality in the health and disability sector. It revealed evidence for the different worldviews of medical, clinicians, and policy managers. Now, what happened, there'd been 7 deaths at Christchurch Hospital, and the Ministry of Health, which people had gone in for something else and come out, unfortunately, in a one case. And it was one of these mispractice, but it wasn't deliberate, it was mistakes. So there was problems with their quality management processes, and they wanted to look at this from a different perspective. So myself and a colleague got invited to work with a couple of the Deputy General Manager of Policy and another staff member to work on this. So we tried to get a workshop, and there were a total of about 11 staff members, and we couldn't get them to meet at the same time. The policy people wouldn't meet at one point, and the clinicians wouldn't meet at another point. So we had to run consecutive workshops. And at this stage, we didn't really realise what was going to happen to the same extent. We couldn't get them to meet. Now, if we couldn't get them to meet at the same time, that itself was problematic. That was back in that time. So the organising question we framed was, what are the factors that interact to drive quality in the health and disability sector? And we had another session planned where we bring it all together. Well, it just so happened that these two groups became policy managers primarily and clinicians, technical people, policy people. So we were going through this group model building process, which you're probably familiar with. Establish an organising question to focus systems inquiry. Use post-it notes or hexagons for opportunities, obstacles. Group them into clusters, give them a descriptive name, identify a small number of variables for each cluster, and separate the variables from clusters so links can be established. Link up the variables, develop an initial version of the CLD, causal loop diagram. Well, here's an example. We generated about maybe 100, 150, 120 ideas, concepts. And that's what these are numbered. Those numbers, how they appear. And then the shaded ones are the strongly held views. And these ones over here are the variables that were identified by the participants. Anyway, the first group, for example, there was about, say, 10 or 11 clusters from the policy managers, of which this is one, structures and incentives. And from these 10 or 11 clusters, we generated a causal loop diagram, which we, using Peter Singer's language, a shared mental model. They all agreed to that in that group. Now you can see things like, and this is the policy managers, the policy people, some economists. You can see things like GDP growth per capita, public satisfaction with health system, vote health, that's the money government gives to the departments for health, effectiveness of the system, effectiveness of the incentives, fit with public goals, coherence of the health system, goals that works. Right, that's their views. That's what surfaced based on their understanding of what quality was, addressing the organising question. By contrast, then, the clinicians met and we organised their thoughts, and you can see straight away they're much more concerned about quality because these were the people that were being blamed. What the hell is quality? Dealing with biological systems, future shock, quality measurement hard, building performance measures into contracts. Measurement not the key, weeks to get information. There are some quality management systems. These are detailed, and then some of the variables that were generated from this cluster, quality of information, validity and reliability standards, number of quality systems, etc. So anyway, a different set of variables emerged, and as a consequence, we constructed a causal loop program, a shared mental model, and we can see in here things like number of quality systems, health worker participation, motivation, clarity of goals, public confidence in public health system, complexity of organisational structures, workload per capita, adverse incidents. This was the thing that actually started the process up, was the adverse incidents that weren't expected. Now we get to the heart of it, the capability, the participation, and even here, they bring in the actual the clients, which were totally absent from the previous causal loop diagram. So in actual fact, so what did we have at the end? Well, we got some different views. The economics, policy at that stage thought it was funny as foretold. The clinicians didn't think it was of any practical value at all. These were hard scientists. So straight away we've got people who not only were their worldviews different as expressed in that shared mental model through the group process, but they didn't believe it was any use as well, because they were used to constructing very scientific models. So the conclusions, well, we use shared mental model to analyze complex system. This illustrated different perspectives of the medical health practitioners. Mixed the groups would have begun the process of bridging the two worldviews and building a common mental model. Priority in public policy reduces quality problems and bring benefits. Requires cooperation of policymakers and clinicians. And qualitative system dynamics, methods of way of accomplishing this, difficulty of doing it must not be underestimated. Now,
Professor Cavana, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
Just going back on these clusters and the hexagons that you created, did you record all of these statements and included them, or did you apply some kind of filtering or to leave out a few or combine a few? So the question is, do you, because in these exercises there are a variety of ideas, some are strong, some not so strong, some valid, some not so valid, some not valid. So who does this, who provides this oversight, and who is capable of providing this oversight and taking ideas or leaving some?
Okay, that's a good question. This is typical of qualitative research. This is what qualitative researchers do. They draw out information and data and then find themes, and then categorize it and actually try and make sense out of it. This is where traditionally system dynamics modelers like simulation people do not have a comparative advantage in qualitative research. So this is where you need to spend some time either getting the skills or finding people who have the skills to be able to sort out. So this process we went through, we did with a mixture of people. There was my colleague Ken Wilson was a qualitative researcher. So he in actual fact helped them identify their variables. They identified the variables, the participants, not us. We helped guide them and we asked them to make sure these were reflective of the contents of these concepts here, because these are concepts which are not directly measurable. These are variables which are more directly measurable. That's the theory, even though they look pretty strange, these variables, but they can be measured according to the people who participated. Well, that's a very good question, and it's not an easy answer, and you want simplicity with your variables. If you've got 150 concepts being generated, and you've got about 15 different groups, you don't want to have 10 different variables for each group to start your causal loop diagram. You only want 2 or 3 to keep it manageable. So there's a trade-off continually between making things a little small, manageable versus large. But what was the important thing here, really, ultimately, was the complete different worldviews expressed in this diagram. This is very macro. They're worried about the government funding the system and how people perceive the system from the outside. That's the policy people. That's where their focus is. But down here, quality meant to the clinicians, what are the service agreements? What are the quality systems? Health worker participation, health worker confidence, right at the coal face. And there was no variables, there was nothing in common. And we put a report together, a comprehensive report, to the chief executive of the Ministry of Health at the time, and they just binged the reports. They didn't want to deal with us. In fact, the guy who was on our team, who was the general manager of policy, went to Australia not long afterwards. I never did realise what was there a connection, a causal connection between this report and his going to Australia. But I hope it wasn't that way, but what it did was this, we were surprised because we came back to the chief executive and we didn't actually see him personally, but we asked if we could follow on the project and try and merge the two, but they wanted to leave it. Because I think at the time they thought this was too dangerous territory. There was just too many differences in worldviews. This is classic. This is why it was published. This was published in the special issue of System Dynamics Review on health. And the only reason why it was published is because it just revealed the two different worldviews using shared mental model, using group model approach. And that's the reason why I say that. So the lesson here is making sure there's a representative group of participants reflecting the different stakeholder interests in your group. And in fact, some of you know some systems by Ashby. Ashby talks about requisite variety. You've got to have as much variety on the inside to cope with the outside, which is the same sort of thing as saying you've got to have the same sort of representation in your working group as you have on the out there, who are stakeholders and are being affected.
So can I ask you a couple of questions? So when you created your hexagon or you listed your hexagon, what was the process for doing that? Because obviously you said it was from the group that were participating in the model building activity, but what did you do to get them to start talking or identifying the problem or
yeah? Well, basically just to get, you saw these are numbers.
Right.
So on the wall, for example, on the whiteboard, we just, each idea as it comes forward, we have a process of actually allowing people to, not one person dominating, but there's a process of allowing people to contribute and to pass if they want to. I mean, there's various ways of doing this. Some are just a process where you have everyone share it. Others are just people write their post-it notes and go up and put them on the board. So if you want to speed it up, just people write down their ideas, their issues, their concerns, and go up and put it up. And then other people go up and try and organise it. So it's useful to break your group. So you break your groups up into those that go and organise the clusters after you've generated all the ideas, and then you usually go around the room about 3 or 4 times. That's enough, because most ideas are surfaced quite quickly. And then you use the other group to you split your group in half and put one half go sort out the clusters, and the other half to check them out and put the names around the clusters.
So you wound up having 2 distinct groups here. One was one that was heavily dominated by policy folks, and then one because of the makeup, 4 policy staff, 1 clinician, 4 clinicians, 1 environmental. So those are quite kind of more leaning towards a homogeneous group. If you had split these groups up, I know it was sort of based on their availability, but if you had actually had more heterogeneous mix, do you think you would have had those emergent? You probably would have. We would have had something which they all contributed to. But this one here, the clinicians group, the policy person was dominated by the. Okay, so their voice was.
Yeah, this one up here, the clinician was dominated by the policy people and the economists in terms of what they thought is collectively what's going on.
Okay.
So that's why you can't even see, there's no evidence really of their contributions in this, really.
I think Bob too, excuse me, I think you cited Dave Kreutzer's paper.
Yes.
Where he outlines the hexagon method.
David Kreutzer,
you might want to look at that paper.
Yeah, definitely in Hodgson's, 1994, someone, you want to look at that. But if you go back to our paper, which the reference is here at the beginning, then you will see that all those references are contained in there. Like everything I say today, I refer to people, they're all in here, references. David Quakes' work, this is based predominantly on Hammond and Hodgson's work as well. So
Thank you.
that for me was a classic study of what not to do, Don't have two groups or more groups which are so totally different that you just, all you're going to do is get their own worldviews expressed. They're not going to reach any strong agreement. And it's impossible to actually merge them together because they were so different. We didn't think it would be so different, but we realized that we couldn't merge those two. We couldn't merge the mental models. Some cases you can merge the mental models. In fact, the next case I just run through quickly, there's an example where we can merge the mental models.
I love this because people think if you have a negative outcome, there's no value to it. Quite the contrary. Learning what doesn't work is perhaps as important as learning what does work.
Yes, that's right. That's absolutely right. Yeah.
And would you think it would have worked if these two very disparate groups came together, or it would have resulted in disagreement and people walking out?
No, it could have worked, but while he had authorised the project, it wasn't that engaged with the project. So there's another lesson there, obviously, I'm familiar with, higher up the organisation that approves the project and actually buys into the project, the more likely there is to be cooperation. The fact that we couldn't, it wasn't us, it wasn't me and my colleague Ken Wilson, it was the two people inside the organisation, the general manager of policy, couldn't get those people to meet at the same time of the day. That in itself was problematic. I mean, I hope things have moved on a wee bit. That was 1999. So we've moved on a wee bit since then, I'm hoping.
That was the last century.
Yeah, last millennium.
Oh, that's millennium, right?
But yeah, so you've got to get acceptance from above, and we can't allow this situation. We were concerned about it. When he said we couldn't get all the people mixed, and there was going to be these two distinct groups, we were very concerned because we thought something might happen which wasn't satisfactory, and it exactly did happen.
Oh, can I ask a question? So once you have the CLD like this, is there any kind of analysis you can perform with
Yes.
the CLD? Like
You can.
Like, for example, you identified several feedback loops, and without a simulation, what can you do with it?
Well, you can. This really shows us in systems work, systems thinking. We tend to look at the variables or the links and the links between them. What's important and how they're linked, perhaps in a qualitative sense, which is what this is. Before we start simulation, which we're trying to quantify the relationships, at least we can get the boundaries. It's like a map. In fact, sometimes we refer, a lot of us in the community just refer to it as a systems map. It's an example of a systems map. A causal diagram is an example of a systems map. That gives us the terrain, which and the boundaries, and we could analyse the feedback loops, but we didn't want to do anything here because they were so different. Because the mental models were so completely different, there was no point in any micro-analysis. Well, for us, and it was a consulting job as well, so a certain amount of time one had to devote to it. There's a limit to what you can do, obviously, on a fixed budget.
Yeah, so a quick question. Are you using from the hexagon to the CLD, is it a top-down or waterfall approach, or you have iterative from the hexagon, you go to the causal loop diagram, and then from there you go back to the hexagon to a plate and having this, it's top-down.
Yeah, top-down. That's the approach we normally take, but others might adopt a different approach. In fact, that's the thing about qualitative research. There's so many different approaches. Are they authentic? That's why the criteria for determining whether a soft study is valid or not is a little different. Validity. See, we're talking about a causal loop diagram which sort of fits into the soft approach. Even though one of my colleagues was a qualitative researcher, which helped balance the team. I wasn't a quantitative researcher, but I was helping with this process. But as far as my colleague was concerned, they was coherent, logically consistent, plausible, the relationships. But there's usually insufficient attention to validity of these models. They're generated, and sometimes they're just left as is. Compared with the simulation model, which has to be repeatable somehow using some tests. All right, so that's the first study. Now, I'll move on to the second one. This was also a systems thinking type group model building situation with myself and two majors, David Boyd and Richard Taylor, invited me to work with them on a systems study. We published it in Systems Research and Behavioural Science. The problem was back here, it was about the year 2000, 2002. There was going to be big changes to militarisation in the army, and the demand for these electronic technicians was going to double in a very short space of time. But simultaneously with this, so we might call this some sort of reference mode or some sort of over time chart. But at this, there had been problems building up, and there had been a lot of people leaving because they couldn't see the way forward. The young electronic technicians, as soon as they finished their service, they wanted to get out because they weren't being treated well and they weren't very happy with the situation. So what had happened is, this is the history here a wee bit, and there had been this big decline in numbers in 1996, and of course this felt its way through the system a few years later when there's big reductions in people capable of going to the next level. So this is the delay factor, but essentially, but how they dealt with this was to give bonuses to the sergeant rank and above. Instead of giving bonuses and helping the younger people, they gave the senior people bonuses, which didn't do much for the morale of the young people. Anyway, so these are just the subsequent effects. And what my two colleagues wanted from the army, they said they wanted to understand the causal factors of relation between them, which of course is a good for system dynamics. Report summarising the process, methodology that can be applied to other critical issues of the army. So the first thing we did, David, which myself did, was sit down and think about the stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders that are involved in this issue about retention recruitment? And we identified these groups using Freeman's sort of approach to develop a stakeholder map. And the issue of concern is in the middle, and then there's the two directions here showing that this trade group influences management influences the trade group. This doesn't tell us about the strength of the relationships, it just shows that there's a direction, causal direction both ways. This influences both ways. They may be very light, doesn't matter. This station doesn't matter. It's just recognising industry training board, industry technicians, ex-army, tradespeople, government, etc. So this is a stakeholder map. So we use this to work out who should we invite to the model building sessions. Who should we invite? Well, I mean, after my previous exercise and a few others, I thought, I'm going to make sure that they're going to get a good mix this time, you know. And so, but my two colleagues who were in the army thought that some groups internally would be better separated out for various reasons. For example, the apprentices got to keep them separate because if there's people higher than up the hierarchy, the apprentices say nothing, no contribute. So we kept them as a separate group, and then they made a decision to put the tradespeople and management in separate groups. Subsequently, we realised that was a mistake. They could have easily gone the same because the tradespeople are managers as well. They become managers, managers of their area. It's just different. This is the more traditional management of the other management. So we could have had these two. The ones we had to keep separate was the apprentices, so that they surface their views, their worldviews. And then all these other ones here were external stakeholders. And we thought we'd just run a separate group model building exercise with them just to get some ideas. And so we ran 4 separate workshops. And the tradespeople generated 77 issues, concerns like accidents or post-it notes. Apprentices, 85, and mostly negative. Management, 5 managers, in about 2 minutes, generated 90 issues of concern. And managers do. They're trained in these things. And then, of course, external stakeholders, they generated a range of people from industry, education institutions, government, they raised 21 concerns. So that was the raw material, essentially. And these were all on different days in the whiteboard. So we're very pleased with their contributions here. A rich array of qualitative data has to begin with. The organising question was, what steps? And this was explained to the first group, and then it was confirmed with the first group. what steps could or should the Army take to better attract and retain electronic technicians. We went through this process again of generating hexagons, we could, or post-it notes, then clustering them, and then identifying some variables which correspond to each cluster for each of the 4 workshops. There was one apprentice workshop, one management workshop, one tradespeople workshop, and one external stakeholders trade workshop. The first one for the, I'll go to the next one slide. This essentially was the apprentices, and this reinforcing loop, as you recognise, is generating downwards is a vicious reinforcing loop because in the wrong direction. And they were all complaining about they weren't satisfied with the qualifications, that was reducing their morale, reducing the proportion of the stay, reducing their satisfaction with career management and their perceived treatment. So most of these were negative. They were going in a downward spiral and they wanted to get out of the Army. And so that's the situation we used here as our over time chart, our reference mode of behaviour, just to sort of see what was going on. And we were brought in here, and we were brought in just to provide a slightly different perspective. And our goal was to help introduce some policies based on the system study, so it will help actually increase the morale, increase their satisfaction, increase the proportion who want to stay in the trade, and get closer to the desired level of satisfaction. That was the idea. So this is what we're trying to achieve over here. Now we generated 3 separate author loop diagrams, shared mental models, of which we then constructed a single combined course loop diagram. Now we could do that because inside loops were very similar to the loops for the apprentices. The tradespeople and the managers had very similar course loop diagrams, shared mental models. They had similar ideas and a similar diagram. And so we generated this. Then we analysed each of the feedback loops operating together, try to find some leverage point where we could introduce some change and then work our way through it qualitatively. Now, of course, we all know that working your way through a diagram like this with multiple feedback loops qualitatively is full of risk, and very dangerous and make it possible. But it just really gives you a sense, and it's a qualitative tool. It doesn't give you high reliability in terms of what the outcome is going to be, but it gives you a good indication. It's a conversation. It's a starting point for a conversation. And we found management. We showed them that if they were doing certain things which were having an effect on the tradespeople, on the trainees, and on these decisions to retain and to recruit. And so we could work through qualitatively these maps and go through a number of feedback loops, write a report on it, and come up with about 10 or 20 recommendations for change. And now this is the external stakeholders one. And you can see it's quite different. It's just a different, it's the outside view. They've got, there's Army leverage points, polytechnic management, where the apprentices go. There's the issue of the electronic technician shortage, government policy, influencing initiatives. So this was all generated as this Army can leverage, increase awareness, can help change strategy to, it can actually help with polytechnic management and training electronic technicians. So in actual fact, that's quite a different. We used information on that to go back and consolidate the combined one. So basically what we came up with was we came up with a good shared mental model between the internal stakeholders, and we came up with something which they could all contribute to. We didn't have the conflict. The conflict there was personal. If they'd been in the same room at the same time, the apprentices would have said nothing. They close up entirely. But because they were in a separate room, they could generate their ideas and concerns. We could incorporate them into the bigger diagram, and then when they all came back together, they could agree that this is how the big picture works. So there wasn't a conflict like with the Ministry of Health. There was conflict. There was massive conflict of all views. It was just two extreme views. This was we could combine them and put them in.
So when you, by the process of actually incorporating these different perspectives into the shared model, and then bringing the groups back together, depersonalized it, so to speak.
Depersonalized, that's correct. That's exactly why we do these diagrams. So we take the conversation away from individuals and look at the diagram to improve the diagram and to share the diagram. So, so that was.
Well, how would you deal with, if, let's say, if once you combine the CLDs and let's say so one of the groups disagrees with a particular variable in this combined one, so would you just take it out?
Yeah, well, once again, it's
Or like some loop
yes,
or connection?
yeah, basically, these are maps. These are broad maps. They're only broad brushes, but like the canvas where you're just sketching out, sketching out the model effectively. And you can get a lot of shared understanding and commitment by cooperating and building this together. There's give and take. The facilitator and the staff can give and take.
Okay.
It's only a sketch, you know, something. If someone feels really objectionable towards something, it's qualitative, a lot of subjective, qualitative research. It's very subjective what you include, what you don't include. As long as it's defensible, plausible, relationships make sense, and what you include or exclude. If you exclude, because you're excluding things from the stage of generating ideas to forming some variables. You have to make some decisions there about which of those concepts you incorporate into your, but you can park there and bring them later. It depends what your ultimate purpose is. So we analyze the feedback loops. We actually we actually did find some feedback loops which showed where army and electrical technicians differed, and we could work our way through those loops to show them why they had common. They didn't disagree with what was emerged, but they didn't understand the linkages. So this is a great tool to help them work for linkages. That's why they were happy with the report, and they wanted to apply it to other areas in the army. And after a while, they incorporated some of the policies that we recommended to recruiting and into their sponsorships schemes and into their pay. And after about a year, in actual fact, what happened with this hypothetical reference mode actually turned out to be correct. That one. Morale started to improve. They wanted to stay in the trade. So for a period of time afterwards, that was the path that they followed in terms of morale. I did some studies on morale and service. But one of the reasons why I think that worked out is because they were asked to participate in the process, to look at the issues. So this idea of commitment. In fact, my student, PhD student Roger Scott, his articles, perhaps I'll put a list of them together for you afterwards, but he's explored these issues, you know, what we're trying to get out of these group model building sessions. What I'm talking about today is just my experiences with four sessions, which I've got drawn some insights from. What he's summarised is look at the literature and try to extract on what we got. So his studies, I'll recommend them. I can suggest that. I go into a little detail about the literature and about people's experiences. So this was, for me now, this was a highly successful study. And it was very good because it contrasted with the other one, which was, well, they both got published, so as an academic, to me that's a tick in the right direction anyway. But if we want to go just beyond academia and find out what's happening in the real world, both of them were important because one of them showed the senior executives, if they don't get these they think about their worlds and they're not even meeting together, then they've got a serious problem, much greater than us. They get the HR people or the personnel people to work with these people to help them feel much more involved and engaged. So they surface that for the health one. This one was great because the apprentices had the air, finally they were allowed to express their viewpoints and they were incorporated in, they were analysed, recommendations made. So I was very pleased with this.
So it sounds like for the apprentices, they just by giving them the communication medium of some sort, was allow that to be a successful model activity versus the other ones. But I've seen situations in organizations where you have to, there's two groups with two different worldviews. You have to effect some kind of process change, and management realizes these groups don't have the same worldview, so to speak, within the organization. But then they try to force us together to, accommodate building a common view of things, and usually it atrophies pretty quickly after those forced events, forced meetings and stuff like that.
Yeah,
That was your first model. We had these two groups,
yes, right.
couldn't get them together. They just had two different, kind of, non-intersecting
But it
worldviews.
wasn't, they weren't separated out because of that. They just wouldn't meet, they just couldn't get them to meet.
Right.
They just physically, for some reason or other, they couldn't get one lot to meet in the morning, one lot to meet in the afternoon. So they had to have separate meetings. So they weren't saying, oh no, my colleague is not going to that session, I'm not going to that session. It was more fundamental. But you're right, look, there is conflict. And cognitive mapping, Colin Eden's approach on cognitive mapping, based on personal construct theory and Kelly as a psychologist, he's got a much more useful approach to get consensus and shared understanding. And often Colin Eden from Strathclyde University in Scotland may use a cognitive map as a starting point for a causal diagram. In fact, one of my students, David Rees, you might know David Rees, he's quite a senior person in the community. David published a paper in Health Systems on using cognitive mapping and causal programming. And David is very expert in this field for looking at health issues, other health issues in New Zealand. Okay, so
I think Jim Thompson went to Strathclyde, right? For his PhD.
Yeah, that's right, he did.
Yeah, so he might have some expertise.
Yes.
He's affiliated with our department, so I don't know what his title is, but he's semi-retired or whatever, but he's in Connecticut, so he can come up here probably.
Yes, we could talk about the great work, because they're doing some terrific work at Strathclyde University Business School, the Management Science Department. Systems, management science, combining them. Well,
Hi. Hello. This is Khalid Said. First of all, welcome to WPI. I'm sorry I could not be there, but you might have learned from
yes.
Mike that
Sorry, I you're okay now.
I should be. Will you be there tomorrow? I'll probably see you there. I
Yes.
plan to come in. I have a couple of comments. First of all, that hexagon method, actually, I have used it a couple of times. More recently, when I was working with Gary for the organ transplant model that we developed for a HRSA project. That was a few years ago. And my sense is that it does give the stakeholders a sense of participation. That's its most important contribution. But then going from hexagons to a causal diagram and a model is really the task which is performed by the knowledge experts, system dynamics or people who are domain experts. And for me, it's very difficult to connect the two. And I think some of the questions that Jim and Suleiman asked were probably in that wavelength. How do you connect the two? And I don't know if there's any work there which specifically suggests some heuristics for connecting the two. But yeah, that's a question mark which probably needs to be resolved. My second comment was that, first of all, a question. You folks ended up with causal diagrams and then you gave them your policy inferences, right? Your policy inferences were based on your causal diagrams.
Yes. Yep, all the policy recommendations were based
so
on
that, I guess in a strict system dynamic sense, if you are an experienced modeler, you can probably identify the dominant feedback structure there and base your policy inferences on that dominant structure. But for a novice modeler, going from the causal diagram to policy inferences can be anything, because the multiple feedback loops in the causal diagram, in fact, can generate very complex behavior. So what I'm saying is that interpreting a causal diagram perhaps is possible by an expert modeler, but not by a novice modeler. And maybe there is some more work needed there, just pointing it out. I'm saying, well, you guys were expert modelers out there, so you probably could see what is the dominant structure and base your recommendations on that structure. But it'll be very tall order for a novice modeler.
Yes.
That said, I think it's great to connect in the real world with real problems. And it was refreshing that you folks are doing this work out there.
Thanks, Callan. You raised two very good points, actually, two extremely good comments there. You know, the link between the hexagons or the post-it notes and the construction of the course work diagram. I mean, it's first instance how reliable are the variables that you identified from each cluster. You know, how do they represent the contents of the cluster, and then secondly, the causal connections. You have to go through a matrix process to actually look clearly at the causal connections between each pair of variables. So it's a long process. I know it's tempting just to put up things on the whiteboard and then put a line along and then build it up this way. That's the easy way, and that's what most people do. But strictly speaking, one should go through analysis of each of the pairs of relationship to see if there's any causality, which way, and what the direction is, and do it pretty comprehensively. And we do that with small models, but not for large ones. And you're right about the second stage, about the second point about once you've constructed one of these shared mental models, they're quite big. I mean, I think a lot of Peter Singer's small models with small archetypes, and they were illustrating certain points, and keep them small to illustrate certain points. And I think there's a lot of strength in that. One could have deconstructed this into a series of sort of archetypes or small pair, two feedback loops at a time, and just analyze that aspect to see what the implications of that were, rather than sort of going a bit around like drawing, going around these huge loops. So how accurate that is, an actual fact is questionable. That's why, of course, ideally, we'd like to construct a simulation model, because it's just a hypothesis, set of hypotheses about the behaviour, about the structure to generate the behaviour. We can't tell the behaviour. We can't tell the behaviour from the structure, but we can guess. We're just guessing. We're in this guessing game. But a lot of qualitative research is actually simplifying and trying to make assumptions about behaviour. So our recommendations are all based on that principle. Analysis of one or two loops, more or less we agreed on the implications of change, what the implications were, and then we wrote that up as a recommendation. And we went right around the diagram that way. So we analysed them by loops, basically. And we put a package together, and they did actually implement. And it would have been interesting doing a study afterwards, which was what Rodney Scott has done in the group model, the effectiveness of group model building in European Journal of Operational Research. It's about looking at published studies that people have done a study afterwards to look at the individual effectiveness of that particular study. Pre-test, post-test, the survey, how have they analysed the effectiveness? Rather than me just talk about it, these two studies really are just commenting on the effectiveness based on anecdotal collection of evidence at the time. It wasn't a scientific analysis of the process and the benefits to the organisation. That's another matter, which is what that article of Rodney Scott, myself and Donald Cameron does look at from a series of different studies that we published, which are actually assessments, evaluations of the usefulness of the intervention, i.e. how useful has been this group mobility exercise in this organisation. We didn't do that. We just walked away from it afterwards and wrote up the results and observed the outcomes as they unfolded. Now that's not very scientific. So what we know in our profession, in the profession of system dynamics, the qualitative and quantitative dimensions, it is a massive field. And quite often we're expected to produce models on the smell of all their rag base. I don't know your experience this, I'm sure. Like you've been in positions where they expect you to produce big, in-depth model very quickly, and they say you can do this in a week or whatever. The community doesn't understand the amount of work to analyse something like this, to construct it, to analyse it, to make sense out of it, to verify the structure and the relationships. If you had to do that scientifically and thoroughly, we would also evaluate afterwards the effectiveness of that intervention. That's a separate study in itself. So that's the
clients also often want a lot of detail that's really unnecessary to the model from a pure system dynamics, nuts and bolts point of view. But it's their piece in the system, and they're paying you or whatever, and they want it in there. And then you're right. They say, well, just put it in there and show it to me next time. It's like, you just assigned me 400 hours of work. Adding all that.
Yes, that's it, exactly. Yeah, that's the thing to be careful of. Managing these projects.
Professor Cavana, this is Anshu. To come to the policy recommendations, did you quantify this model, or like Khalid mentioned, you took a qualitative view and then came to a policy recommendation?
Yes, that's correct. We just did a qualitative analysis of the feedback loops, and often we would just look at a couple of loops at a time and look at the leverage points on a loop. For example, this one here, command attention. Okay, command that link there. Command attention, required output, required electronic technician capability, based on the trade structure, etc. That goes back into recruitment. Well, we could intervene in the system here and say subcontract this. Subcontract a lot of the electronic technician output that's required by management. We suggested, okay, we could break that down into outputs that have to be produced within the Army versus something you can subcontract. That would take the pressure off. That would take the pressure off down here in terms of recruiting and retaining electronic technicians. If you could outsource. So we sort of used the model as a means of exploring options in a qualitative sense. If we had quantified this, that would have been another year's, well, that would have been a lot of work, and it would have been a very good exercise. And I think a lot of the armies do actually do a lot of modelling of this nature, quantitative modelling, with their workforces to manage their workforce planning.
Actually, if I might have another comment. In your mind, perhaps you did have a much simpler causal structure that drove your policy recommendations, and that is in line with what Forrester used to say, that there are about 20 or so generic systems out there into which you can fit a lot of the problems. And I personally think that in such qualitative analysis, our policy recommendations actually come out of matching the problem with one of those generic type systems that we might carry in our heads. And as far as the detailed causal structure is concerned, many years ago, I went and talked at Booz Allen Hamilton, and some other colleagues like George Richardson and a few others were there too. And there was a modeler who worked with Booz Allen, and he kept showing big causal diagrams and kept saying, this is for shock and awe. This is just to impress the client, but well, our recommendations are based on more considered smaller models. That's what he wanted to say. So there is a value in subsuming the thought process of the clients into a causal diagram. But perhaps the policy recommendations stem from a more intimate knowledge of a small number of generic systems in which we are able to place these specific problems. I think that's an important skill. So far, we acquired it through experience. Perhaps we can try to teach it and practice it.
Yes, the other thing about this particular study, I should just remind everyone, that there was 2 Army personnel collaborating with me, 2 people who are working in the human resources section of the Army. So when I talk about these policies, while I might discuss various aspects on some of the feedback loops, or I might have a systems archetype in my mind where I look at a balancing loop and a reinforcing loop, or vice versa, or whatever. I might have one of, say, Peter Singh's archetypes in mind. When I discussed it in a generic way and simplified it, they had the detail, they understood the logic, and they could actually formulate common sense policies based on this map. Whereas when they didn't have this map, they were in isolation. They had probably the same common sense policy, but they didn't couldn't work their way through the diagram to how it might affect other aspects of the system. So the advantage of this was that they could then play out their ideas on this to sort of show how this could have unintended consequences elsewhere using the map. So it probably didn't really help them to formulate policy, but it helped them to check their own mental models against larger ones. That's why we generated these recommendations, which were actually implemented. Now, this is one thing I would never do by myself. I always do it with people who know about the system. So that's one thing I've learned over time with system dynamics. Never work by yourself on something. It's just a waste of time, because you do not have the expertise. You have to work with people. These are shared models and expertise. You have them on either as collaborators or as participants, but they're stakeholders. Now, I'm not sure of the timing. I'm happy to go on as long as you guys want, but is there a particular time that you're bound by?
We would probably, worst case, have 45 more minutes and then we'd have to leave.
Okay, yes, I'll try. Okay, that's fine. I'll just try and make sure I finish on time for your worst case scenario. What's your best case scenario? 5 minutes more.
Right. Well, I think people can stay as long as they need to stay, and we are taping this.
Oh, yes.
So, and it will be on the economics chapter's YouTube channel. So, if you need to, sign off and go do something, you can see the rest of the talk and the Q&A on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, but I will carry on anyway for another half an hour. I think I'll be able to speed up the second 2 cases a bit. So. And then we'll look at the conclusions and try and wrap it up. So I'll try and finish within the half hour. That's reasonable. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll just run through this quickly. This is a study. This is once again a causal loop qualitative system dynamic study. These 3 are qualitative, and the last one is a quantitative study with group vulnerability. So this is a group vulnerability study again, and it's myself, the Forestry Model Skyline is the name of the Forest Research Institute in New Zealand. Tom Adams invited me to participate with him and his group on looking at the effect of the emission trading scheme. This is when it was first introduced. It was at the stage where climate change is becoming much more accepted in New Zealand. They needed a method to actually hopefully generate more tree planting to capture more of the carbon dioxide that's generated from industrial processes, and they wanted people to convert their farms, some of their farms, especially the hill country, which is not well managed in farming, to trees. So that was really, the government was developing their emission trading scheme. So essentially, we were invited to look at a qualitative model first, of course, with diagram, and then construct a physical model. But in terms of the process, we have the situation which a lot of you might be or might not be familiar with. I'm not sure whether you have a scheme like this in America, but basically what happens is the trees absorb carbon dioxide, sequester carbon dioxide, which takes out a lot of the pollution from the air. That's why we're losing trees around the world. We're actually losing the ability to suck in the carbon dioxide generated from the factory. So this is what to some extent, C Roads, the work at John Sturman and company, very scientific work on this process in a much larger scale globally. And it's a physical process going on. But in New Zealand, they were providing carbon credits for people growing trees. So the government was handing money to them, and they would give their credits to the industrial organisations who were polluting the environment who would have to give that to the government in exchange. So if you pollute the environment, you have to buy some credits which are being generated by trees growing and absorbing carbon dioxide. So we looked at this problem situation, stuck to the workshop participants, then had the process. So essentially, we looked at the value chain in the forest. It's quite big, really, quite comprehensive, just as here. And who will it affect? And we looked at some of the history. The emissions were growing at a terrible rate, and over that 20-year period. And basically, the trees were also planted a lot more as well at the same time, simultaneously. We identified, myself and Tom Adams and some of his colleagues identified the stakeholder groups, once again, using Edward Freeman's stakeholder map approach. But we couldn't get them all here, so only the ones where there's a little asterisk could we get a representative to attend the meeting that we had to construct a causal diagram. So you can see there's a lot of groups which have an impact on, are affected or affect the forestry value chain, but we only had small number of representatives from each of those groups. So the organising question was, how will carbon trading affect New Zealand forestry? We went through this process, list the issues, group the issues, merge them into variables to develop a causal diagram. And we went through a quite an elaborate process, and we ended up with this diagram, and we analysed some of the loops. This is a much smaller diagram, and basically what actually happened though, what I've left out of this, which is on the paper, is all the detail. We actually had a lot more economic variables, about 20 economic variables, and we ended up by reducing those to a single variable, economic viability of forests, because we didn't want the economic side to dominate the map. It'll get obsessed with all the economic details. So we just simplified that. It's in the paper, all the economic links and economic variables. We simplified it into a single variable here, the economic viability of forests, and then we just analysed the loops around that.
How would you measure economic viability?
We didn't, well, that's once again, we didn't build a simulation model. We didn't build a simulation model. So we didn't, this is one of the reasons why we didn't build a simulation model, because the system's getting too complex. In fact, to be perfectly frank, the work that John Stabben and others have done on sea roads captures this system and these issues, the interface with generating carbon, generating greenhouse gases and absorbing it. And so, but from our point of view, we came up with this diagram, and the smaller picture, the boundary around here, we focused just on this bit here initially, the people present at the workshop, whereas afterwards we thought, you know, we should really extend the boundary to look at the change in behaviour, some of the soft variables, change in attitude. So we brought some soft variables, and we've mentioned these soft variables before. The people present were more focused, were more engineers, more forestry people who are concentrating on physical processes. What we realised afterwards that we had left out some basic variables which were going to illustrate behaviour change. You know, how do you influence behaviour change? How do you get a change in behaviour over the time towards these, when even accepting climate change as a reality, you know, or doing something about it, changing people's behaviour. So we brought these variables in. That's why we extended the boundaries a wee bit from this, which was generated at the workshop, to this, which is, you know, I'd probably simplify this one too much. Anyway, I'll wrap this one up because I was conscious of time, and this was going to take a little less time. So, what did we do here? What was the lessons for us in this particular study? We had a group monopolic situation. We only had a small percentage of the stakeholders present, so we're always going to have a problem. And they were mostly economists present, or business people, and they were giving a business perspective, economic perspective. So we weren't capturing the full range of perspectives. So purely economic models do not capture the system, that we should understand. Then was noted about public perceptions of climate change or attitudes to change. This was in the early stages of the debate for climate change. And we need more research into the social aspects of land change use. At that time, they were introducing these schemes for people to change the land without understanding why people would want to change the land. It's not just on economics alone. When you're changing land patterns, there's a lot more other factors involved, lifestyle, and other factors which were being measured. So really, this one here, I mean, at some level, it's more simplistic, and it doesn't really provide a huge amount of insight into, other than the fact that we simplified the economic variables and then we drew attention to behavioural variables.
On the logistics to the actual sessions, with the 3 case studies so far, have you seen any consistency or commonality between how many stakeholders you had, how long the session should last, is how many people you need on the facilitation side of the group for things to work? I mean, I could see if you had 20 people, that would be a different session than if you had 100 people.
Yes, that's a good point. Now, I'll have to give credit to the Albany System Dynamics group here. And Peter Hogmut, they've developed some scripts, some norms for these group model building studies. So if you're going to go seriously into group model building, you must look at the work they've done. They've got some guidelines that they've produced. And so, but from my personal experience, the bigger the group, the more difficult it is. I mean, if we can get a group of about 10 people, 10 to 12 people, that's a great group to work with, as long as they're representative. The problem here is that this group,
right,
you can see that the people who were there were from these groups, and they were mostly business or economic type people doing logistics, people doing numbers. So we had a pretty biased sample, and it wasn't a cross-section of a full cross-section. So we weren't hiding for nothing really. And when the diagram emerged, we had to put in extra variables, showing the behavioural stuff, because that's what we were trying to incorporate into the big picture. If we had other representatives present, we would have got to that amount and been drawn wider. We haven't. All I know is that we need representative group of stakeholders, spending a lot of time understanding who the stakeholders are and making sure I know groups that you represent them fairly, reasonably. You can't represent every single person, but you can role model as well. You can get people to actually, who may not be in one particular group, they can actually be encouraged to actually think from the perspective of these other groups. So they generate ideas for them. So if people are collaborating fully, trying to understand, because most people occupy, I mean, the forestry consultant is still a member of the general public, still a consumer, and there could be someone in the processing company as a farmer. So they can, while they won't be represented officially at the table, they can unofficially speak about some of the issues from their perspective. So we can always role model. In fact, this domain, the group model building domain, is clearly quite rich in terms of its potential. These scripts can help them to a good sort of work on these scripts. And my student, PhD student, also contributed.
Yeah, there's a website, Scriptopedia, where they have a lot of them listed.
Yeah, so you have to go back and sort of go through the process of go through learning that they've developed and the guidelines. So this one was, we were going to construct a small simulation model, but then we decided the priorities changed for my colleague, who's a modeler, and he was working on other projects. In fact, I think I really brought this into the equation because we simplified the economic perspective to try and, because of the bias we had in the stakeholders, to try and get a balance. All right, so that's the 3 qualitative ones. Here's some experience.
Professor Cavana, how long did this forestry study take, beginning to end, to get a sense if we try and apply it in industry, how much time we should keep in mind in terms of hours and total man hours, or however so you could give a feeling.
Yeah, the forestry one was probably one day workshop. We did one or 2 days of analysis and writing up about a week. It wasn't very long. The forestry one was quite quick. The other one, the army one was quite a lot longer because it was a lot more detailed work with all the groups. And we analysed the cause diagrams and combined them and did analysis of them and wrote reports. This was a much quicker. It was just a quick sketch, basically. This one. But we could have pursued this one. We could have got other stakeholders. We could have gone back and put them back in front of them and extended them. We could have critiqued them. We didn't. But that one would have been about a week's work all up.
Okay. And the Army study was roughly how much?
Well, I think that would have been a few months of work.
Okay. Okay.
And all the people, the 3 of us involved, it would have been about 6 weeks, or 2 months each. 2 months. That could have been about, in total, about 4 or 5 months total.
Okay.
Once again, this is part of the evaluation of group model building to actually keep good records of what you do, how long it takes, and actually analyse behaviours before and after. And actually, that's important to do. That side of things.
Thank you.
All right, we'll just go to this last study. And okay, then I'm working, this particular study, I was working primarily with Martin Tobias, who's an epidemiologist with the New Zealand Ministry of Health. He invited me to help construct a system dynamic simulation model of tobacco policy analysis. And Ashley Bloomfield was a policy manager at the time, who is now actually Director General of Health in New Zealand. So he's now the head of the whole Ministry of Health, this Ashley Bloomfield. But at the time he was maybe a director or assistant general manager of policy. Us and myself constructed this model, which we published in Systems Research and Behavioral Science. And then we did some subsequent work with Ashley Bloomfield and published that in the American Journal of Public Health. So this is just a sort of snapshot. Well, because we're running out of time, I won't talk about every slide necessarily in detail. I'll just, the slides, we'll keep the slides anyway so that people can read the slides.
Sure.
Yeah. Essentially, it's a complex system, isn't it? And the purpose of the second study was to examine enhanced cessation and get some money from government to help support the program. But initially it was just to understand the dynamics of smoking and quitting and starting in New Zealand at a macro level. And there's a lot of knowledge gained. There's a lot of work previously done. And in fact, that's the issue of American Journal of Public Health was a special issue on tobacco control, which actually had papers published all over the world, obviously America as well. And so basically what we did was we constructed an I think model. We didn't actually have much in the way of group model building initially. It was done by a group process, small group. But in fact, it didn't really follow the traditional group model building process, which I just discussed with you. Because my colleague, Martin Tobias, came to the table with a lot of knowledge in his head. So I think it was not more like a traditional system dynamic study done with people, participants at the organisation itself. It wasn't done using, we didn't start with a causal diagram, we started with a stock and flow diagram. Population aging chain. And here is basically what, this is a simplified aggregate version of what we had. We had a lot of age groups, 10-year age groups in here, much more detail. But essentially we had major stocks for people who had smoked, youth smokers, adult smokers, recent ex-smokers, non-recent ex-smokers. And then we had flows coming in, and we looked at dynamics over 50-year periods. And we had points, we had some feedback effects of youth being reinforcing role models, adults, their friends, encouraging at this stage. And we have policy interventions down here, tobacco control policies at the initiation stage, at the quit stage, youth, quit stage for adult smokers. We have some metrics over here: smoking prevalence, tobacco consumption, tobacco children mortality. Now, we had a simplified model. We didn't have the effects of poor health in here. We just had a situation occurring where people would be in these categories, and actually it was simplified. So it was quite a big model, but it was simplified in terms of the real system, because people become hospitalised or become with tobacco-related diseases. We were just focusing here on mortality associated with tobacco, not all the morbidity of diseases associated with it. And so that was and we have the exposure to secondhand smoke coming from these different areas. And this model was used by the Minister of Health, used with the Minister of Health to actually get, I think, $47 million for cessation program.
I didn't expect them more from it. So the flow from never smokers to youth smokers, you've got this role modeling effects. Is that just just pure mimicry from those that are already in that stock of youth, or is it like? I mean, there are other things that I think that would affect the rate of flow. Advertising.
Yes.
You see on TV and things, or is that somehow?
Advertising was banned at the stage.
Okay.
No advertising of cigarettes. And I think the same in America. You can't advertise cigarettes in America, can you?
Just in journals, magazines.
Can you? Or you can't advertise anywhere.
I mean, you still see when you go to a store, right? Those stores, don't they have little
yes,
stuff like that? All right, so that would be probably a nominal effect.
Yeah.
And most would be attributed to mimicry.
That's right. This would be the effect of friends and colleagues and family on people starting.
It's like a
I mean,
bad.
this is a
typical bad.
This has been empirically estimated, the effect of other young people on starting up smoking, effects of current smokers. So that was just a big
You probably have a friend that says, "Hey, try one."
That's it, yeah. So that affect's been studied statistically. And those ratios have been analysed. And so that was a pretty strong effect. I mean, and so but that was basically basic flows in the system, fairly back aggregate level. We used I think package, and we constructed a control panel where we could change the initiation rates and smoking rates and risks, the relative risks of each of these age. There's risk of dying. It changes as you cease smoking, then the risk diminishes. It never goes back to zero, but it diminishes over time. And so these have been statistically calculated, these relationships, using epidemiologic health statistics over time. We just incorporate the model. And that's the one thing about working with experts, because they have the knowledge. I have to provide the sort of framework of the system dynamics approach. They provide the input, and I ask them questions about the validity of the sources, suitability. That's why I just work with people, with experts. I don't construct a model because of that very point, because the knowledge that goes into these things is immense, and to get it validated is impossible. So we constructed the model to the base case, and we were quite happy with the output, showing these behaviour patterns, these metrics that we mentioned before. These are things like smoking prevalence, consumption, mortality over time. We looked at possibly a 25, 30-year period here, and we analysed a range of scenarios where these are the final year metrics. And we looked at a range of scenarios, including less affordable cigarette, less addictive cigarettes, less toxic cigarettes, combination of both. And then we just summarised the results from the simulation run. And this was the base case, the business as usual scenario. In other words, 22.3% of adults was smoking at this point in time, 2011. It was anticipated to go down. With nothing changing, this wasn't going to go down much. With no change in policy, no change in attitude, it wasn't going to go down much. consumption, the numbers here, and the tobacco attributed mortality. 4,900 dying in New Zealand. Quite a small population. Still a big number of people. And wasn't much change over this period for the business as usual. And that's the rate per 100,000 people. So we can see that the business as usual scenario reaches a peak and then starts to go down because there's some general patterns and trends anti-cigarette smoking at that point in time in the modelling work. And then we ran a series of analysed these scenarios based on a note of risk, initiation, quitting. We produced some changes and put these elasticities into the model and then simulated the model with each of these scenarios, which is a combination of changes to the model. And then at the time, this is the World Health Organization who said the present situation in which, this is quite a while back now, in which the most toxic form of nicotine delivery is the least regulated is unacceptable from a public health perspective. Now that, of course, is 15 or 17 years ago. At that stage, it was least regulated. So at the time, there was serious risks of expansion to tobacco and nicotine markets, compensating smoking, gaming industry, and a budget audit. So we looked at these scenarios and simulated them. Now this is something you cannot do with a quantitative model. You need a quantitative model to analyse scenarios. So it's a bit like the iceberg. You know, the qualitative that is, might be sticking at the top, but the bulk of the model, the workers are hard, you know, constructing the model, they're doing the analysis with it. And by making these small changes to a model which was basically validated for the purpose which was intended, it sort of reached Jack Forrester's sort of looked at that for the purpose intended. And then we did these scenarios so we come up with consistent behaviour patterns. And so we found over from the year 2001, this was historical up to about this point, first 7 years, and then the policies was, we took effect of different scenarios. Now the use of the word scenario testing, policy testing, strategy testing. Now I know there's some difference of opinion about how to interpret what those words actually mean. In fact, in our book, we sort of regard a policy as a change in parameter or change in structure. Strategy is a combination of changes of policies and strategies, and a scenario is some change in the external environment under which you subject your policies and scenario and strategies to see what the changes are. But in this sense, we just sort of think they help want to use more broadly as a scenario being a combination of policy and external change. So once again, a lot of the language we use in the management sciences, the system sciences, means different things to different people. In fact, tomorrow we're going to find out about that because some people think systems thinking means one thing, and other people think systems thinking means something completely different. And the big colloquium tomorrow, with different worldviews about what these things actually mean. But we have to be just wary of the language thing. There's some subtle differences in what we mean by these things. But these is essentially, so we see here less toxic cigarette. Well, of course, less toxic cigarette, people wouldn't give up as much. I mean, we have some behavioural assumptions in here about what they do with less toxic and more toxic and more effective, etc., and more pricey, less affordable. And you can see here the less toxic one, people still carry on smoking a lot more. And interesting now with the what are these things called? These
Vaping?
Yeah, vaping things. The vaping, which is really a form of less toxic cigarette for vaping. You know, we've seen a takeoff of people vaping, but now they're beginning to see the consequences of this vaping, which they said previously there was no effect.
Different type of toxicity.
Yeah, different type. Yeah, that's exactly it.
It's a big issue in Massachusetts right now because the governor just temporarily banned all vaping.
Yeah. Really? Yeah, yeah, that's
So
interesting.
I guess 3 months or 4 months.
4 months.
4 months ban.
Old vaping, or is it just like?
All vaping. So some companies, some stores, which does have in one store, or a lot of employees, he's like, I have to lay them all off. I can't for 4 months, you know. So it's having a deep impact on him. So he's trying to fight it. So
So is there a ban on selling cigarettes?
e-cigarettes.
No, just a ban on e-cigarettes.
Yes, not the regular stuff.
Not the regular
Not
stuff.
the tobacco.
Because I don't know why. I think he's trying to until somebody understands what's causing it. Are there some supply? You know, is there something contributing to it? The supply chain where the harmful chemicals.
There have been a bunch of deaths
Deaths.
from
Yes.
vaping recently, and it's
So-
triggered this emotional
Yes.
response.
Okay, that's interesting because there's been, I mean, traditionally, clearly, there's been a lot of deaths associated with cigarette smoking because all the toxicity, all the different chemicals that are in a cigarette. And there's more chemicals now than there was 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Because what some of the companies are doing is compensating, putting more chemicals in for.
Yeah, like one of
The
yes.
vaping deaths have been mostly young people too, so it's even more dramatic. It's not like a lifetime of smoking has led to lung diseases.
Yes.
20-year-old kid dying from
Yes.
something in the lungs from vaping.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think I heard some of the formulations had high concentrations of vitamin E, so ingesting that into your lungs is harmful. So they're not even sure, like, how they're regulating the supply of the chemical sources. So that's the problem.
Yeah. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because we didn't look at vaping or anything in the study. This was done 10 years ago.
Yeah, maybe it's much more prevalent now.
Yeah, so vaping was around 10 years ago. But when it first came in, the attitude of the industry was it's not going to have any effect on health. But then if you look back 20, 30 years, tobacco people were saying there's no evidence that people with cancer from smoking cigarettes. That was the mantra from the tobacco industry. But I used to work with them, and I was hard pressed to find an executive who smoked, even though the mantra was it does have no effects. Finding people who actually smoked it. So there was clearly some mismatch between what was knowledge perceived out there in the community. And vaping is an example. I mean, clearly from the beginning, it was obvious that it was going to have some harmful effect. Inhaling chemicals into your lungs, whatever they are, is going to have an effect. That's why we've got pollution. You can see pollution in water, but you can't see pollution in air. You haven't got the same visual signals. So people can't see it, what they're inhaling. If they were drinking it. Yeah, well, that's interesting. That in itself, I would imagine some of my colleagues who carried on with this sort of work we're describing here, like some of my colleagues who published in the American Journal of Public Health, will also be doing work on vaping now and exploring that. And that perfect application of system dynamics modeling. I do these studies so I'm an academic, so occasionally I work with some organisation. That's why there's a whole lot of different sorts of studies. It's not like I work in the health industry. It's some of our colleagues here, Jack Homer and company, done some great, Gary Hirsch, done some fabulous work in the health industry on an ongoing basis, long-term basis. So I wouldn't be surprised if they haven't done some work on this vaping. Because when we published this stuff, I think they had a paper at the same time in the journal, special issue. But
the two big issues right now is the vaping, and they just made marijuana legal in Massachusetts, and all of the dynamics associated with that.
There's two interesting changes that's occurred here. That's interesting. I mean, but I can say categorically, and I'm sure everyone in this room will totally agree with me, that both those areas are absolutely great for system dynamics type of work that we do, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, and especially you guys in social policy here, and the importance of social policy and the tools that we bring to the table to help bring a bit more rigor into the analysis that's undertaken in the social policy area, as distinct from the engineering area, which has always had a lot of rigor, mathematical rigor, with systems engineering, whereas in social sciences, that's not had the rigor. So our set of tools are most highly suited for social sciences. If you're one of the first departments, one of the few departments in the world that has expertise in the social sciences in this area. So I hope you guys carry the flag for a bit longer. Yes. Anyway, come back to the study. Well, we did some scenarios, and we analysed a range of these different scenarios and came up with some results, which was fascinating stuff. And we found that We did some measurement, because the simulation model generates numbers which we can check against various validation measures. And we see that the combined scenarios did actually result in a lot less people dying per year. Not a massive amount, but 10% is still enough. It's a significant change without dramatic change in policy, just by having small changes. But it wasn't going to change the world. We need some behavioural changes to change dramatically.
Did you try to combine with everything except the less addictive? Because that seems to be the one that makes it go up, right?
Yes, that's the less addictive. Yeah, it must have been the combined must have been reduction. Oh, here we are. What we've got here? Oh, this is it. 20% reduction in affordability. So there's 30% reduction in nicotine content.
That's probably the less
Addictive.
Yeah. In other words, leaving that out and run the other policies might have been, I don't know if you did it or not, it might have been interesting, because that seems to be the less affordable cigarette is not helpful.
No,
I'm sorry, not less affordable.
that's right. The less affordable, the impact for less affordable.
Less toxic.
I'm sorry, less toxic.
Yeah.
Pardon me, yes.
Less toxic.
Anna's absolutely right. So like leave that one out and the reduction and do the other, so the combined with the three, it's going to be three.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not business
I
as
could see a
usual.
lot of people saying, oh, it's less expensive and less toxic. I'll have two.
Yeah. Well,
That doesn't,
I didn't. To be honest, the experiments that we did was a model. I helped construct the model, but the experiments were designed by the practitioners,
and
by my colleagues in the Ministry of Health, who understood. And they were asking the questions. I obviously put them on with them. Obviously, joined with Martin Spice in particular. But I didn't design the experiments. But
There's some research, and I couldn't name it right offhand, but people who want to lose weight and eat lower calorie food actually eat more because there's less calories, so they feel they can eat more. So they end up having more calories than they
2 scoops.
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
Isolation against the base run. Yeah. Okay. But then you want to run pairs, 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 4, and then 2 and 3, 2, and then you say, well, but not recursively, simultaneously or recursively, the combination of stuff becomes almost unbearable at some point.
Yeah,
right? All the combinations of things that you can try.
But at least you can do it. Once you've constructed a robust model, which does is valid for the purpose which is intended, then you can conduct a series of experiments. And this is what they did with the minister. And this resulted in, with the minister, it resulted in us getting, or us, them getting increased, they've used it for strategy, the national strategy. They used it for the excise tax rates analysis. Increased investment.
Could you increase the excise tax rate to such a point that it becomes unaffordable for people to buy it? But then you'd have
Black market cigarettes. I'll sell you some out of the back of my truck.
That's
people
or Lucy's.
in the
Loose cigarettes.
United States
Yeah.
got different tax stamps.
Yeah.
Different states got different amounts of state tax. Yeah. People will go down like to South Carolina and buy a truckload of cigarettes and then bring it up to Massachusetts.
You all trailer for you.
Yeah, and put like a max
There's
tax
there's a
stamp on it.
threshold, right,
Yeah.
above which that activity starts.
Yeah, we did. I looked at another model that should publish the system of review. We found evidence of black market and tobacco products in New Zealand. By doing the analysis, there was a gap between the supply and demand. Most had to be met by either imported container loads of cigarettes and whatever, or grown in parts of the country, which no one was aware of. And we did it. We calculated what it was essentially. Some margin there, but so basically, this model was used to support cabinet paper, and they got an extra $42 million over 4 years allocated to smoking cessation. We are particularly pleased about that result, participating in this project to actually generate that sort of behavior. And that's when you're working in the right space, when you do something and the client likes it and they can use it and they can achieve what they want with it. But the model illustrates the principle of using estimates from survey as input to a mathematical model, which is what we're doing today, simulation, to generate projections to create policy. learning experience and policy analysis, tool for policy options analysis, which what you were talking about then, and a way to prioritize investment in data collection vehicles. So the model itself was used for quite a wide range of things. But the important conclusion that high quality empirical data and good basic epidemiology analysis can provide inputs that can be synthesized and integrated by system science and the system dynamics to run meaningful and insightful policy experiments in the virtual world. And that thing is what we do. Maybe we've written it in a long-winded way, rather than call integrated by system dynamics, system science. That raises another issue, which I think we might have mentioned, Mike, we discussed with already, Mike, about the naming of us in our field internationally. The systems engineers are well known as an add-on enhancement to systems engineering, and us, all the rest of us in management, the social sciences, economics, what are we really? We haven't got a suitable name that really is acceptable to the community, but everyone understands what a systems engineer is. They may not know totally what a systems engineer is, but they've got a pretty good idea what a systems engineer does, don't they, those people? But when we talk about us in the social sciences, in management or business or in economics, sociology, psychology, whatever, there's no name that people recognise as being our business. And I presented a paper on this subject at the ISSS conference in July at Oregon State University on this issue, because I see it as an issue, and that's why I have problems with my labelling of my system science. We know it's system dynamics, but it's not. It's beyond system dynamics. In fact, tomorrow we'll be discussing it when we talk about systems thinking and the relationship between the systems approaches and how they connect in, and us as a community, how we should be known that we're working on a book on feedback economics. Us three and others, David Wheat and Brian Dangerfield, and Carla's side as well, as involved in that project. But we've called that feedback economics, haven't we? We've changed the name from system dynamics and economics to, we can't call it economic dynamics, because in economics, the label economic dynamics has certain connotations.
That's right. It's a phrase that's used quite often in traditional economics.
That's it. So we can't. Whereas the term feedback economics, I think we've captured that space. We just need to get it out there, because that's what we deal with, feedback systems.
Traditional economics models are loaded with feedback, yes, but no traditionally trained economist knows it. You're not taught to think about those models and theories in that way.
That's right. So, some good papers in there.
Except if you're Bill Phillips.
Yes. That's right. Yeah, I was student. Okay, so basically we were very happy with that, as you can see. That project, we were delighted with that project, and getting it in American Journal of Public Health, we were very pleased with as well. Special issue, it's got some great, to be honest, I said to guys on the committee of System Dynamics Review, when I was a managing editor also, to model our journal alongside American Journal of Public Health. It's a remarkable journal. It's got some letters, it's got some history, it's got some great articles, which is a limit, about 4,000 words. So there's, you can't just go on forever, basically. But it's a nicely presented journal. It's got a lot of interesting stuff for the community. That's an example. It's a good example, in my opinion. It's a very good example of a great journal. Some journals are presented very well. Well, of course, System Dynamics Review is a great journal as well. Don't get me wrong. Especially having just published in there recently an article on new archetype, power and influence archetype. In fact, I was hoping to talk about that power and influence archetype, which several of us co-authored and published in the first issue, System Dynamics Review. But I might touch on that tomorrow at our systems colloquium, because it's got some interesting features, I think, which are worthy of conversation. But it didn't quite fit the project for today. Now, let me just sort of summarize now. We're just wrapping up, and I think you said 45 minutes.
Yeah, we have to walk about 2 blocks that way for 6 o'clock.
So, good. I've got about 2 minutes just to wrap up our session, and I'll just briefly summarize the conclusions related to stakeholder engagement in these systems thinking. Maybe I should have changed it to group model building studies. Anyway, identify the internal and external stakeholders and stakeholder groups related to the goals of the project. Select potential representatives from these groups. Allocate engaged stakeholders with different activities phases of the study to develop the design outputs. Of course, of diagrams, systems, maps, models, etc. Simulation model. Encourage stakeholder involvement in communicating and implementing systems outputs to create maximum impact outcomes. Follow up with stakeholders on their continuous improvement. Share information publicly, the community, wider stakeholders, like journals, trade magazines, community news, etc. These are some of the conclusions that we reached regarding stakeholder engagement. That doesn't summarise all the advantages of group modelling. That was just focusing here on stakeholder engagement. Because I move on to another slide, just the final slide, which is this relationship between the impact outcome of a study and the stakeholder engagement. And this is really the lesson that I really want to emphasise, is that the greater the stakeholder engagement, the greater the impact outcomes going to be. And those 4 studies, for example, if you recall, I said there wasn't much involvement in the quality management study at the beginning. Really, they couldn't even agree on what time the data come, and the CEO didn't want to know about it. When he found out that there was some disagreement, he binned the thing. Unfortunately, I published the results, but so we didn't totally bin it. And the fair follow-up one I mentioned before, there was only a small limited number of stakeholders present. We didn't advance properly. We couldn't really make sense out of it. Once again, behavioural stuff, we didn't have people involved, engaged, so we didn't make any progress. They were scanned. But the other 2 studies, we had great stakeholder engagement. Army, we had the technicians, we had technicians, we had the external stakeholders, we had the managers, the tradespeople. We had great representation, and we had pretty good impact outcome. We had some policies which we implemented and some changes to place. We were particularly happy with the Ministry of Health. We had high engagement with the tobacco policy model. We had the CEO, and in fact, the Chief Executive Officer. In fact, one of our, Ashley Bloomfield, who was one of our co-authors, is now the Chief Executive Officer. So, involving someone in a study of this nature, and they became the CEO of one of the biggest organisations, biggest departments in the country, which is health. But both those 2 are big, obviously, the Army, the Defence Forces, and health, big organisations, one of the seals, which was the same year, for sure. And we had high engagement with stakeholders and high impact. Finally, with the tobacco one, we raised multi-million dollars through the budget process to help with the tobacco cessation program. We helped that process. We can't claim to have done it. We just helped with that process and understanding that was necessary to actually achieve that sort of a vote from government into these tobacco cessation programs, which I'm sure here in Massachusetts, on vaping and on the marijuana applications, some things can be done along those lines, similar lines, to explore the implications of these policy changes. And so that really just about wraps it up. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you for attending in the virtual world. I hope that some of you left out there.
Thank you very much, Bob. Appreciate it very much. Well done. So, Christine, we're going to have to go to our reservation now for dinner. So, if you could please, I know you will, convert the recording.